Hey YouTube, welcome back. Today I want to give you a quick rundown of one of my favorite builds that I've ever played in last Epoch, and it's also my favorite build of the current patch so far. So patch 8.3 dropped about 2 weeks ago. There's lots of new skills for the Sentinel, a couple new things across the board, but one of the things that changed is that in the Void Knight skill tree, there are skills that now scale with Vitality. And in case you don't know, Vitality is one of the base stats of the game along with Intelligence, Attunement, things like that. And Vitality doesn't do too much, but it gives you 10 flat life. So this build, we are playing Devouring Orb, and by stacking 1 point of Vitality, not only do we get the normal good stuff of 10 flat life and some healing, but we also get 2 flat Void spell damage, which means that instead of using something like a staff, which would give us a ton of flat Void, we get to use a one-hander, we could use a catalyst, and we get to go crit very easily. So this build is a crit Devouring Orb Void Knight. We don't have access to too many defenses because we're a Void Knight build, but we're trying to make use of armor wherever we can. We have a ton of Vitality. In my current build, I have 85, which means that I have an extra 850 life, which currently is boosting me up over 3,500 life. I've got 3,800 life. Breaking 4,000 life with better gear would not be a big deal at all. And then on top of that, we can also make use of some insane new gloves that have been introduced to the game. These are not mandatory to the build, but if you happen to have them, Ravenous Void happen to have an implicit modifier of Vitality. And you know what? I think that EHG did this intentionally. I think that they put Vitality on these gloves so that not only could you have this insane 25% damage reduction just by having a pair of gloves on, but also this particular build, this little Void Knight here, gets some extra damage out of them as well. So I do need to tell you one thing going into this build. I think that this build is bugged. Normally, I wouldn't like building around a bug. I don't like intentionally building around a bug. But according to some of the responses that I've gotten from EHG developers, I don't think this build is working the way that they want it to work. So I guess I can give you a rundown real quick. There's 3 things going on here. Devouring Orb is the name of the skill. Once we start going over the skill tree, I'll show you that Devouring Orb is also the name of the purple sphere that is orbiting your character. There's Abyssal Orb, and Abyssal Orb it's the small homing orb that is like heat-seeking. It chases down enemies and it explodes on them. So our build scales the damage of Abyssal Orbs, or at least that's what I thought it did. So there are 2 nodes in the Devouring Orb skill tree that both say hit damage. One of them says Devouring Orb hits, deal more damage, and the other one says Void Rift hits, deal more damage. So both of these nodes are supposedly not working with Abyssal Orb, the small heat-seeking thing. In reality, they do. So both of those nodes can be used right now to scale our damage. I think that they should in the future as well. I don't think that they should be removed from scaling Abyssal Orb. This build is not busted OP. It's just a strong build that happens to be able to exist because these nodes don't work the way that the developers intend them to. So currently we're in beta patch 0.8.3. This patch released pretty recently. I don't expect this to be fixed at any point in time. It's not particularly abusive. It's not a popular build. It's not something that the developers should fix, in my opinion. But just so you know, according to their responses to me, this isn't working the way that they want it to work. In any case, let's give you a quick rundown of the build. Let's talk about the gear, the mastery, the skill specs themselves, and the idols, just so you know what's going on. So here's the build. Let's talk about the skill sheet first. We have 85 Vitality up here, 3,883. We got res across the board. We have 56 Endurance threshold because I haven't been able to farm up the right blessing. Unfortunately, I can't get it quite high enough, but 56 is pretty good for what it is. Crit Avoid capped, and that is about what you need to see here. Let's jump into the skill specs first. So we'll talk about Devouring Orb. I have 20 plus 1, and I'll show you what I would do with a couple extra levels. The most important part of this build is that we are coming all the way over the right side for Abyssal Orb and Abyssal Orb frequency. 9 out of 9 would be the first thing I would do with this build, but I've trimmed 1 point just to get a tiny bit of mana efficiency and cast speed. I did this pretty late in the game just because I feel like I have enough damage already, and I wanted to move a little bit faster. But just 1, 1, 1, 9 is what you would do. In addition to that, we're taking 1 point down here for Dark Moon. Dark Moon makes it so that our Devouring Orb orbits around us. And then you'll see that these small orbs that we leave on the ground behind us, well, those are the Abyssal Orbs. And those are being created with the frequency over on this right side here. Beyond that, we have a little bit of movement speed, which feels really good for just running through echoes. 1 point, and then 1 point into cast speed and mana efficiency. Pretty flexible node. And then this, which is something that I talked about just a moment ago, this extinction node. So this says Devouring Orb hits deal more damage. Devouring Orb is the name of the skill, but it's also the name of the thing that's orbiting our character. So whether this gets fixed at some point in the future, I read this as Devouring Orb hits. I thought that it referred to the skill itself, and if it does refer to the skill itself, then that more damage multiplier should be inherited by Abyssal Orb. Apparently that's not what the developers intend, but that's how it works right now, so bear with me. In any case, this node up here gets an honorable mention. We're not taking it here because we don't really need it, but Void Rift hits. The purple explosion that goes out, that is a Void Rift, and this node does scale the damage of the Abyssal Orbs exploding. Apparently it should not, according to the developers, but it does right now. As an aside, this node is actually double bugged. So it says Void Rift hits, and this says Devouring Orb hits. Apparently they're not supposed to apply to this, but they do. But they also say the word hit. Both of these nodes currently work with damage over time, and they currently work with ailments. So if you were scaling Doom, or Time Rot, or Bleed, or Poison, or something like that, these nodes, I don't think they're supposed to work. I think this is like very clearly a bug that they do, but they do apply to ailments right now. So I might level a Bleed Devouring Orb build, even though I don't really like building around bugs or nerfed or buggy interactions. But I might do it anyways because Bleed Devouring Orb sounds awesome. So we might just try it out. We'll see. Let's move on. Let's talk about Smite. This is our second damaging skill here. We have the most important points are down here for like the damage. We have the sacrifice nodes and deep impact. So we have 3 out of 5 for sacrifice, just to make sure that it doesn't hurt us too much. You could crank this up if you feel more comfortable with this, but I did not feel more comfortable with this. We have 3 points in sacrifice and 4 out of 4 in deep impact. And then the other nodes, 3 and 4 into conflagration. These points are just for the more damage multiplier. So this node here would give us 50% more damage. These nodes here give us 80% more damage. So I think that this is a nice balance between like the amount of nodes we need to spend and what it takes to get the more damage out of this. You could trim some points. You could spec more into sacrifice, spec more into this. I might play around with that in the future, but currently my DPS feels excellent. We are breezing through 181 corruption, making our way to 200 corruption in hardcore, and I like where it is. But if you wanted to attempt getting more damage out of this build, then these would be the kinds of things that you would think about. Moving on to the next skill after that, let's talk about Anomaly. So Anomaly, we are using this pretty much exclusively for survivability. We get a ton of leech out of this, and it feels excellent. If there's anything that you know about Void Knight, you know that Void Knight doesn't really have too much defense available, but you do have tons of leech. And one of the reasons for that is this node all the way up here. So we have 4 out of 4 points in Void Maw, and a couple points along the way just to get there. So this gives us increased health leech. So you can leech by itself, but if you want the leech to happen faster, then you need increased health leech. It's the kind of thing that you might see as a suffix on gloves, but we're getting it here. Past that, we're spending a couple more points to make a time bubble. We're casting it on ourselves. We have 5 out of 5 points for generic critical strike chance, and this will apply whether we're casting Anomaly on something or whether we're casting Anomaly on something else. But this is going to be on us. We're going to have this global buff the entire time. We also have 1 point up here in Swift Rest. This Swift Rest cooldown recovery speed does apply to Anomaly itself, so just make sure this stuff happens faster. This cooldown recovery speed is nice because it also means that as we have this bubble on us, we have a faster cooldown for Devouring Orb, which means that we can spawn more balls more often. If you were interested purely in DPS, which you might be, you could take 5 points and maybe a point out of the cooldown recovery speed here, and instead of having the increased critical strike chance, you could spec down into Mark of Rod. So this would be 2 points into this for the travel, and then maybe 4 or 5 points here. So it costs 6 or 7 points total. But this is 100% increased void damage taken when the enemy returns to the present after you Anomaly them. So Anomaly, even though the time bubble is being cast myself, it's still going to shift something else into the future. So it doesn't work on the dummy, but if you cast Anomaly on an enemy in an Echo or a boss, I think all bosses get shifted in the future as well. So even something like Shade of Robus, you can just, let's see, wait for the cooldown. You can just like shift them in the future. click it again, it goes on cooldown, it changes from the orange icon to the red icon. They would come back, and then they would take 100% increased void damage for like 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, depending on how much you're speccing into this. So this would be more damage, but it would be like worse clear speed because it's only applying to exactly one monster as opposed to a global buff for you. Next up, you see that we have Sigil of Hope here. So Sigil of Hope means that we have a couple points specced into the Paladin skill tree. And the real reason that we're using Sigil is we want armor in this build as a primary form of defense. This is the second, it's almost the third version of Devouring Orb, Void Mage, Void Knight that I've played so far. And you don't really have too much defense. So for this character here, I wanted to make a dedicated effort in order to actually build armor onto my character. So to do that, we're also using Iron Sigils to get 200 armor per sigil. We have 4 sigils, so we have 800 armor just coming in from the fact that we have this here. If I show you my armor here, we're 35%. As we load up 1, 2, 3, 4, we go up to 53%. At various points, his character has been at 55%, 57%, 59%. But I think around 50% right now is what I'm happy with playing in hardcore. So on top of that, we're not playing a block build. We do have +1 sigil up here. We have some sigils gained on kill, and then Decree of Flame and sigils of Despair, just to get some extra % increased damage and some flat damage from these travel nodes along the way. If you weren't using Sigil, I think the other option here would be Volatile Reversal. Volatile Reversal is pretty generically strong. It's also really fun to use and does a good chunk of void damage. So you would spec 3 points all the way down in here for Harbinger of Dust, and this would say enemies take 30% increased damage, and then you'd use this as more of a single target nuke, along with giving you a ton of cast speed from warp time and a ton of movement speed from catching up. This also just gives you more mobility, makes the build fun to play. But for me, I wanted to use Sigil of Hope because I specifically wanted this armor here, and then we have some extra damage coming along the way. The last skill to talk about is Lunge. Lunge is kind of unremarkable. If I could have an unspec'd Lunge and also have Volatile Reversal, I would do that. Unfortunately, I need all these skills on my bar, and I don't really have space for anything else. But if I could, I would go unspec'd Lunge and then also use Volatile Reversal. That said, because we have this on the bar, we might as well spec it as well. We have a 15% kill threshold here, so we can lunge into something and then kill it instantly. This is the only kill threshold that's in the build. We also have 4 out of 4 points in Holy Incursion. This gives us a little bit of clear speed, a little bit of burst damage as well. So we can dash into a pack of enemies, have 3 smites happen immediately, and all of those smites use our smite skill tree, which is spec'd all for damage. The rest of Lunge here is just a little bit of utility. We have 5 out of 5 points in frailty. We do have other sources of frailty in the build, but just instantly applying all 3 stacks of frailty for reducing the enemy's damage is a great thing to have. On top of that, we have 1 point, 4 point, and 1 point just to be invulnerable while lunging, giving ourselves a little bit of extra utility. I don't think there's anything else you'd really be interested in doing here. It's good, not great, but again, if I could spec Volatile Reversal and take out Lunge, I would probably do that. Next up, let's talk about the passives. So we have a level 100 character. I don't expect you to have a level 100 character. Let's talk about like the essential points, and then I'll talk about the points that I kind of filled in around the edges once I got to like level 90, level 95, and level 100. So the first things here, we scale based on vitality. So anything in the game that says vitality is already pretty good for us. It gives us 10 life. It gives us 2 flat damage. It's exactly what we want. So we have 8 points vitality here and a little bit of strength just to bridge the gap. And then we have armor and less damage taken from nearby enemies, which is perfect. And then much later on, once I was like level 95, level 100, moving points around, I ended up speccing into this because it has a little bit of life and cooldown recovery speed for movement skills. I feel is worthwhile just for zooming around echoes and having some extra mobility. Last is all 5 points in time and faith. We need all 5 of these points. This is all of our mana sustain. Smite is here for damage, but because we have a -3 wand, which most wands are -3 wands, that -3 spell mana cost. Because we have that, we can just pretty much hold down Smite. It auto targets, it hits most things, and it also kills most things. But it'll give us 10 mana on use and makes our mana just pretty easy altogether. Let's talk about the Paladin skill tree. We want a couple points in here because for me, I'm using sigils. If you want to use Volatile Reversal instead of sigils, you wouldn't necessarily need these. That said, these points are pretty good to begin with, so I'm happy enough to have them. We have some elemental resistance here just to make gearing easier because neither of these other nodes are appealing for us. We have 5 points in Valor, strictly for life, helping to bridge the gap once again. And then up here at Blinding Light, this gives us 14% endurance, You could have 5 points here. I have all 7 points in here because, as you'll see in the background, I'm actually not endurance capped, but 56 is good enough for me, and it's certainly good enough to hit level 100. All right, last up is the Void Knight skill tree itself. You'll see that it's pretty trim. I really like all of the points here. If you wanted more damage, you could get more damage out of this than I have. If you're playing hardcore, you want armor, this is a great skill tree. I really do support it. But we'll talk about some of the variations as we go. So we have 10 points in health, Void Res, and Phys Res, just to make our gearing process easier, and only 1 point turning our Smite into Void damage. So we only need 1 point here. Remember, we have 85 Vitality, which means that we have 170 flat damage just coming from our life scaling. We don't need to spend 1 extra point to get 2 flat void damage. We could spend 5 points here and 8 points here. We could spend all of this to get even more flat damage, but all of my flat damage is coming from life, which makes me feel just really good about how much effectiveness I'm getting out of like where my resources are going in my build. So we only have 1 point here. We do have 6 out of 6 for void damage leeches life. This is a great source of leech. It's one of the great reasons for being a Void Knight to begin with. We have 1 point in Void Corruption, which is crit multi per point. So we are going crit. We have our offhand catalyst with +6 base crit chance. And then 73 crit multi, just coming in from all the points we've dedicated into this tree here. After that, we have 8 points into health. This looks weak. I get it. It doesn't look very good. The strength gives us 4% armor per point, which is pretty worthwhile when we're trying to scale armor as a relevant layer of defense. If you wanted to, you could trim all this life. You would trim the strength points for the armor as well. And you could spec into the flat damage nodes here. Or you could even spec into the percent damage nodes in Devouring Blade if you killed recently. That's a fine thing to do. For me, I like how beefy my character feels. My current effective HP is about 15,000 against Fizz and about 13,000 against non-Fizz hits. So for me, 15,000 is still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. You'll see like a Blade Dancer might get 50,000 effective HP, and maybe like an end game super beefy character is maybe 100,000 effective HP. So only having 15,000 effective HP, the previous versions of this build that I played, they had plenty of damage. They had like 95 vitality, tons of damage, tons of gear, but they just didn't really feel that good to play because they were a little bit squishier. So this time around, you'll see that I've done a couple things like using Sigils of Hope, like using this Doom Knight node here for strength. I want more strength and I want more armor in the build, and this is one of those concessions. It ended up working well. I like it a lot. Next up is Vitality. Vitality is good. Next up is Vitality. It turns out Vitality is still good. And then we have all of our points into echoes. So 5 points here and 1 point here are spectacular. These 10 are a bit contentious. You might feel like dropping these from the build. They would bring you from, instead of 40% chance to echo, you'd only have 30% chance to echo, which is doable. You could spend these 10 points into maybe 4 points here and 4 points here for 100% increased void damage, and then you have 2 flex nodes to put somewhere else. But if a skill echoes, it's kind of like 1% more damage. So these 10 points are 10% more damage. I'm into this. I think I like it. I think it's a good choice. It also makes the build feel very consistent. So I think I would still recommend this to you as well, even after thinking about it. So strictly speaking, per point, you could spend 4 points here and 4 points here for 100% increased void damage. And that's 100% increased damage over 8 points, which is the best source of percent increased damage that you can get, if percent increased damage is the only thing you care about. On the other hand, movement speed is great. So we're going to take movement speed nodes, 15 out of 15 here. It's technically less damage, but it's 15 movement speed, and no one's going to say no to that, especially not me. Last thing rounding this out, it's just 1 point in Void Flux. If this took any more than 1 point, I probably wouldn't take it, but for just 1 point, having another extra little layer of defense, just in case something happens, I think this is worthwhile. I'll just spec it. It's fine. Okay, let's talk about the gear as well. You'll see a lot of vitality. You'll see some spell damage, void damage, crit chance, crit multi, things like that. And nothing here is going to be too spectacular for you. I will point out that coral rings have an implicit of 6 vitality, which is incredibly good for us. So we're going to use coral rings all the time. And then anytime that we can get vitality, especially exalted vitality, tier 5 vitality, That's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for. So vitality is number one. We want it everywhere. Makes us nice and beefy in terms of our life total, and also gives us our flat damage that we would otherwise get from something like a staff implicit. I do want to point out real quick, this is something that we talked about for a little bit, but this is my endgame character here, and I feel really good about my damage. So this is a breakdown of the tier of each of my items, which I think is kind of interesting, right? So this character is great. This character feels very, very good to use. You walk through monoliths, you kill bosses. It's a very fun build to play. And this is the breakdown of like the total tiers of each of my items. Like my helmet's tier 16, my gloves are unique. We have like an amulet with tier 16, but 2 of those are tied up in a suffix that does nothing for us. So it's kind of like a tier 14. My catalyst is tier 12, our relic is tier 13, our belt, like these items are not tier 20. And this is kind of a conversation that we had on stream earlier on about like, do you need tier 20 gear in order to get to 100? Like how many tiers do I need on my gear in order to have a quote unquote good character? And really it's about having the right affixes on the right base, right? Like that matters a lot more than actually having tier 20. Having tier 20 on like maybe like tier 5 prefix, tier 5 prefix, tier 5 suffix, tier 5 like 554 or 5555. Having tier 20, having all tier 5 modifiers in your gear, if it's on the wrong base, it's really just not good, right? So I would much rather have like tier 14, 15, 16 on the right base with the right lines of text than something else. So like this chest piece, for example, it could be a lot better. It only has, tier 1 of the damage modifier, but it has a bunch of life, a bunch of life, a bunch of vitality. It's exactly what I want. I would love to have some kind of exalted modifier. I'd love to have like tier 20, tier 21, tier 22. But for what it is, it does exactly what I need. I don't need more than this. Beyond that, you'll see something like a belt. So we have a bunch of hybrid life, percent life. Pretty much every character's belt should always have percent life and hybrid life because those modifiers are great. A little bit of void damage and cleanse on a prefix now that that's been introduced to the game in patch 8.3. It's great. Like it doesn't need to be more than this. And yeah, it's only a tier 12 belt, but it does everything that it needs to do. So just having the right modifiers in your gear is sometimes better than just having, a sheer quantity of tiers across all your items. So let's hover over the gear. We have Exalted Vitality with +1 to Devouring Orb. I wish we were +2. I wish we were +3, but the Exalted Vitality is great. For the body armor, Vitality, Void damage, health. For the belt, we have Cleanse. I've been using Cleanse on every character that I've played ever since 8.3 dropped, because anytime you get Armor Shred, Ignite, Poison stacks, Slow stacks, anything like that on you, you just click a potion. For me, it's click spacebar, and all of those disappear, which is great. For my boots, we have Vitality, Movement Speed, Life, and Life. For my relic, we have a base that has void damage on it, which is great, the Dread Banner. And then Spell Crit, Crit Multi, some extra res, some frailty. Across something, you'd like some frailty. If you don't have frailty on your amulet or on your relic, then you are only relying on your lunge in order to apply frailty. So in one of those two places, you'd like to have that. For our wand here, we're avoiding cast speed as much as possible because cast speed only scales my smite damage, but it doesn't scale devouring orb damage at all. It gives us some quality of life. It helps us move around faster. It helps us, auto cast our devouring orb if you're using numlock or if you're just holding down your pinky like I do. But cast speed is good, but I don't want to go out of the way for it. So with the cast speed implicit on Dragonhorn Wand, then a little bit of crit chance, crit multi. It should be spell critical strike chance, but I didn't want to give up this crit multi roll because it's so big. The suffixes, chill is generic, it's strong across every single build. And then ignite, well, for smite, ignite gets changed to slow, and then I have more damage against slowed enemies. So ignite's fine. It could be something else as well. For our offhand, the most important thing about this catalyst, honestly, is the implicit. We wouldn't use anything that is less than 6. So you'll see the implicit has a range from 2 to 6 plus the base spell critical strike chance. 6 is the only option for us because this is our only source of plus base crit for our skill. So we start at 5 plus 6 is 11 base crit. Beyond that, we have spell critical strike chance, some crit multi, whatever res you're missing, maybe some poison res. Now that poison damage has been reintroduced to the game and it actually matters. We can't walk around with 0 poison res anymore like we used to be able to in patch 8.2 and prior. Last up is the rings. These are both vitality rings, coral rings. Having 5 and hopefully 6 as the implicit is best for you, obviously, because that's life and damage. And because we have so much vitality, I have 85, which is plus 850 life. Not having life as a suffix on your ring is really not that big a deal. So filling in some resistances, filling in some endurance threshold or some endurance percent if you don't have those yet, and then just getting as much percent increased damage and the prefixes as possible. So we have double tier 5 on this one, and then we have tier 5, tier 6 for percent increased damage on this other ring. So that's really what you're looking for. Not having life, not a big deal. Okay, last up is the idols, right? As you're leveling this character, if you choose to play this, which I recommend, I think this build's a lot of fun to play. Honestly, the best thing for you is open up your loot filter and get a rule that says vitality plus anything. Vitality plus void res, vitality plus fizz res, vitality plus void damage, vitality plus something is spectacular. So these small ones, the 1x2 horizontal idols, they roll between 1 and 3 vitality. I would use a 2 or 3. I wouldn't really use a 1. I don't think it's very good. But that's great. Honestly, it's everything you need to get started. You don't need anything more complicated than that. For my build here, I intentionally am scaling armor. I've shown you a couple times my armor goes up to 53%, and then in previous iterations of this build earlier on, 55, 57, 59. So we've been using idols that look like this, which is flat armor and percent armor. I had something with flat armor, percent armor as well, but I've replaced it with plus 6 vitality because these can roll from 3 to 7 vitality, and that's just so good. So I'm happy enough to have this here. That's the kind of stuff that you're looking for. Chance to shred armor on hit. Remember, armor is only 70% as effective against non-physical hits as it is against phys hits, but we'd still like to have armor shred somewhere in the build. So this is my only source of armor shredder right here. You want it somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's on an idol or if it's on a weapon or something else, but you want it somewhere in the build. Last up is actually the most important idol. You do want one idol with this text on it. You do want something that says chance to gain inspiration on kill with void skills. So inspiration, if I hold down alt, you'll see what it says. Inspiration is a 4-second buff that gives you 20% increased cooldown recovery speed. That cooldown recovery speed is nice for Lunge, for mobility, for Anomaly, which also gives you cooldown recovery speed because of how we spec it up here with Swift Rest. And it also just gives you chances to shift enemies into the future and keep yourself safe and give yourself the juiced up leech rate from this thing. But almost most importantly, cooldown recovery speed does give you damage with Devouring Orb because it has this 4-second cooldown by default. And then every time that we get a source of cooldown recovery speed, it goes down to like maybe 3.6, maybe 3.0, maybe 2.6, and you can just have more balls going off more often. So the very last thing that we can talk about for this build is the inclusion of these gloves, Ravenous Void. So this is a busted, super strong, new unique pair of gloves that have been introduced to the game as a chase unique item that requires level 91 of all things, and it only came in patch 8.3. So these have been in the game for about 2 weeks or so now. It has a lot of text on it, but there's 2 things that I want to call out for you. First of all is the implicit. I can't believe they gave these gloves an implicit of plus 8 to 10 vitality. They must have known that they were buffing the vitality scaling nodes in Void Knight in order to scale with vitality. The fact that they put vitality on these new chase unique gloves is just like chef's kiss. It's totally perfect. I love it. So that's good because it gives us life and damage, right? So we have 85 vitality in this build, and we'd have just a bit less, maybe 76 without these here. This has a lot of text on it. If you're looking at these gloves and you haven't thought about them already, what this means is it gives us 25% damage reduction. So we gain a stack of Void Barrier every 3 seconds. You see that I have 5 barriers down here. And if I move my face real quick, you'll see that 5% reduced damage taken per stack. And those stacks disappear if I go low on life. So dropping below my endurance threshold converts stacks of Void Barrier to Time Rot, and then I lose my defense. So I have 25% damage reduction all the time. And then once I go below my endurance threshold, I lose my 25% damage reduction, and instead I just have my endurance. I also take some void damage over time from Time Rot. Doesn't matter. So what this means for our build, first of all, they exist, they're insane, they're virtually best in slot for every build, which is maybe too good, but that's kind of beside the point. So what this means for us is we don't really want to build endurance threshold. We have endurance, we want to cap it at 60% like normal, but endurance threshold plus 69 endurance threshold, we don't want anything like that on the rest of our gear. Just life, hybrid life, percent life, vitality, armor, things like that, but not endurance threshold. Not with this item anyways. So that's about it for the build. Like I said before, we are currently using this to push corruption in hardcore, which is really not something that I've done in a dedicated way previously. So we're at about 180 corruption. I'd like to take this to 100, 200, 300 corruption. I don't really know. I don't know what corruption feels like in hardcore, but I think this character is geared up pretty well to take it on. It has excellent clear speed, basically feels like a walking simulator, has enough single target damage, has good utility with phasing bosses out of time with Anomaly. It checks all the boxes of what I would want to build to do because it feels incredibly easy to play. Everything is basically auto target. Devouring Orb is auto target. Lunge is auto target. Sigil of Hope doesn't require any targeting. Smite is auto target as well. Anomaly casts on top of you, and the only targeting you need to do is if you want to shift something out of time and phase it into the future, well, you have to move your mouse in the right way for that. This build is very easy to play, easy to gear, easy to get experience and kill monsters as you're walking simulator going through an echo. It's just, man, it's the kind of build that I enjoy playing. It's been a great time so far. So if you have any questions about the build, you can always drop by Twitch at twitch.tv/PerryThePig. You can also leave comments here on YouTube. Been doing very well, but responding to your comments there as they show up. Or you can just join the Discord as well. So I'll leave that link to Twitch and to Discord in the description of this video. But if you're looking for a build to play, this one's spectacular. I'm going to keep playing it until I die or until I don't know, farm corruption as high as I can. So it's been a good time. Glad I can finally share this build with you, and I'll see you next time.